All right, as everybody's getting signed in, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. I am Carrie Knuth. I'm the Assistant Director of Student Life for the Ivy Tech Fort Wayne campus. And we have an excellent program today for you. We're joined by lots of folks, and Student Life has partnered with the Ivy Tech Fort Wayne and Warsaw Diversity Council, as well as one of our student organizations, GOAL y Amigos. And I will be joining you guys a little later in the event to do a drawing for participating. We are doing a live drawing for a $50 gift card to Cheddar's, which is a Darden restaurant here in the Fort Wayne area. And so stay tuned to the end, and I will do that drawing live for those of you participating. And then if you are watching this on the video, I will be giving instructions at the end of the presentation to show how you prove that you watched the video, so you can be entered into a second drawing for two additional gift cards to Walmart, two $25 gift cards to Walmart. So thank you guys for being here. I'm going to quickly turn it over to Joann Alvarez. She is, I will let her introduce her titles because she's got a few of them. And take it away, Joann.
Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate it. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Joann Alvarez, Director of Student Success and Engagement, as well as Diversity Lead. And on behalf of the Fort Wayne Warsaw Diversity Council, I want to thank each of you for joining us today. Ivy Tech Community College is dedicated to establishing a sustainable culture where everyone is respected, accepted, and valued, with a commitment to civility, in which we encourage professional and academic development with open communication, honesty, empathy, and respect. The Diversity Council seeks to create a platform to begin dialogue on topics that can sometimes lead to uncomfortable but necessary conversations that can express differing or controversial viewpoints. As an institution of higher learning, we know the importance of having discussions where people can safely touch on social issues and current events. Today's presentation on Kids in Cages, How Did We Get Here, can be difficult, and we ask that you listen to learn and listen without judgment. To keep our presentation moving, we ask audience members to mute themselves. However, we do encourage you to submit questions. Questions may be submitted to the chat or sent privately to myself or Carrie throughout the presentation. We will do our best to have those questions addressed by the panelists, either during the presentation or at the conclusion. Remember, this is an opportunity to create dialogue, ask questions, and learn. Our Diversity Council will continue discussions and programs in a safe, open learning environment for all. A huge thank you to our Student Life Office and GOAL y Amigos partnership. As advisor to GOAL y Amigos, I'm proud to share our mission, which is to educate, engage, and support Ivy Tech students while promoting events and leadership opportunities that advance the Latino culture. With that, I would like to introduce you to Susana Ruiz, GOAL y Amigos president. This will be Susana's first time serving as moderator, and while we have practiced and prepared, please allow her grace as she stretches her leadership skills and adds moderator to her resume. Susana, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Like Dr. Alvarez stated, my name is Susana Ruiz. I am president to GOAL y Amigos and intern for the Office of Student Success and Engagement. At this moment, I would like to direct everyone's attention to a video that we're going to share. It is in timeline outlining the immigration process from Latin American countries to the United States.
Just a heads up, it's a little quiet at the end, but at the beginning, but it'll get a little bit louder.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maggie, and I am the secretary of GOAL y Amigos. Christina and I put this PowerPoint together with the help of Susana and Marvin to present some basic background on immigration policy in the United States.
Thanks, Maggie. Okay, some background before we get into it. What does immigration mean? It means migration across national borders. It's nothing new for the United States. In fact, our first immigration law passed in 1790, 14 years after the United States became a country in 1776.
On September 6, 1984, under the Reagan administration, the Immigration Reform and Control Act was passed. So unless adults were directly related to children in detention centers, they could not be released to them. So children spent extended amounts of time in these detention centers. Someone especially affected by this was 15-year-old Jenny Flores, and she ended up filing a lawsuit which changed standards for holding child immigrants, and she was released.
During the Nixon administration, Flores v. Meese was still an ongoing issue. In March 7, 1988, Nixon appointed Judge Robert Kelleher of the United States District Court to the case and delivered a win to the Flores side and all the immigrant advocacy groups supporting Flores.
Reno versus Flores, a case that took place between 1992 and 93 during the Clinton administration, decided that keeping children from being released to anyone other than immediate family was not unconstitutional, overturning the outcome of Flores versus Meese. Then again revisited with the Flores settlement in 1997, it was decided that children should spend the least amount of time possible in detention centers, and their standards of living had to be updated.
During the Bush administration in 2003, there was a creation of the Unaccompanied Alien Child Program. Its purpose was to provide care and oversee the custody of unaccompanied children. They find sponsors and place them into homes or place them into temporary facilities. In 2005, Bush's administration introduced Operation Streamline, which created the new process of pressing charges against immigrants who are apprehended while crossing the border illegally. Prior to this, immigrants would have been released back into their country if caught, otherwise known as catch and release.
In 2014, under the Obama administration, cages were built for immigrant children crossing the border with no known guardians. Cages were described in a quote from Polyfact as chain link enclosures holding immigrants at border processing facilities.
On April 2018, Attorney General Jeff Sessions enacts the Zero Tolerance Policy, which was basically Operation Streamline with a catch. 100% of immigrants caught at the border would be tried if caught, versus the 60 to 80% that happened in Operation Streamline. By 2018, a majority of all federal criminal prosecutions, approximately 61%, were immigration-related, followed by drug-related offenses. In June 2019, a group of attorneys with the Flores settlement visited a border patrol center in Texas where children shared their experiences of inhumane treatment, which included inadequate food, hygiene, and childcare.
On February 2, 2021, under the Biden administration, the president signed an executive order establishing a task force to reunite children who were separated from their families at the border between January 2017 and January 2021.
Thank you all for coming out today and listening to our presentation. We encourage you to do your research on top of this, as this presentation was just the tip of the iceberg. Thank you so much, and we hope that you'll learn even more from our panelists coming up next.
Okay.
Awesome. So I just want to make a point that this video, the last timestamp on that video is February 2nd. That was when we created the video. Since then, there's still continual news coverage on what's happening at the border. So that by no means limits our timeline. If anybody would like to receive our resource list, we would be more than happy to email it out to anyone. Just send a message in the chat, either directly to Joann, Carrie, or myself, and we'll be happy to share that with everyone. At this time, I would like our panel guests to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Peter.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Susanna. So my name is Peter Claussen. I'm joining you from Goshen, Indiana, and I'm a supervising attorney with the National Immigrant Justice Center. Here in Indiana, we're based in Chicago with offices here in Goshen, Indianapolis, San Diego, and Washington, D.C. A bit about my background, just briefly. I grew up in the rural Midwest in Kansas. After college, did a year of voluntary service in San Antonio, Texas, with an organization called Rivas, which was kind of my first immersion into the world of immigration. Stayed there for a few years, then lived in Indianapolis for a brief time before going to law school in Pittsburgh. So kind of made a tour around the country and currently live in Goshen as an attorney. So I'm happy to be with you all.
Okay, following, Cynthia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. First of all, that video was awesome. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I am located in El Paso, Texas, joining you guys from El Paso. I am an immigration attorney. I practice, I specialize in removal defense and family-based petitions. So I don't work as much with the children. Linda is the children's expert in this area here in El Paso. But I do work a lot with the adult detainees and people that are in the country trying to petition for family members, or, you know, even if you're abroad and you're trying to come into the country. So a lot of removal defense and mostly just the family-based petitions. I've been practicing for 10 years and I went to school in Chicago. So I kind of know that area, but I'm glad to be out of the cold, even though right now I think it's really nice. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Following is Linda Rivas.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Linda Rivas. I'm also reporting from El Paso, Texas. I am an immigration attorney and the executive director of Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center. And we are a 34-year-old nonprofit organization that serves the needs of immigrants and asylum seekers on both sides of the border, both El Paso and our sister city of Ciudad Juarez. I am a proud UTEP, here University of Texas of El Paso alum, and also went to law school in Loyola, New Orleans. So happily came back to practice immigration law, which is exactly what I had set out to do when I went to law school. So I'm one of the lucky few that's doing, I think, exactly what I wanted to do. So just living my faith as well, and what I set out to do in this world, which is really something I'm very privileged to be able to share. Happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you, each and one of you, for taking the time to introduce yourself. We are so happy that you had time in your busy schedules to join us today. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know our objective for today's video. We want to create a safe place for dialogue and increase understanding of the complexity of the immigration system, which especially towards the immigrant children, with what they are enduring right now. We want to touch on any emotional or psychological trauma that is caused to the children by the separation of families. I'd also like to let everyone know that we want to do our best to keep all the information shared in today's dialogue factual and non-bipartisan. And I would like to start by asking each one of our panel members what drew them to study immigration law. If anyone feels comfortable going first.
I'll go first. So I actually, DePaul was my law school. I went to Loyola undergrad. Linda, I didn't know you were Loyola New Orleans. I was Loyola Chicago. So DePaul, I was at DePaul Law School and I did an immigration, it was like I'm trying to think of the word. It was like a class, but we were able to actually represent immigrants. And so I saw the process of doing that. I really, really enjoyed it. And so that's kind of the area that I looked into. I really like, it's very satisfying when you are able to help people. A lot of times our clients are people that have been struggling for a long time in getting legal status. So there's a lot of uphill battles, but it's very gratifying when we are able to help somebody.
Yeah. So for me, it's also want to tell you all, Cynthia is one of our most rock star, respected, and amazing immigration attorneys here in El Paso. So I'm really honored to serve on this panel with her today. So for me, it was seeing my family go through the immigration process. I am myself an immigrant. I was very lucky because my mother was a US citizen. So there was a direct path for me to be a US citizen. As a matter of fact, just the law, the way I actually refer to it, this came about when Ted Cruz was running for president, and whether or not he was eligible to run for president as he was born in a different country but his parents were citizens at the time he was born. And so I'm in a very similar situation. I was born in Mexico. My mother was a US citizen and had lived here all her life, except for leaving with my father to follow him for a job he had in southern Mexico. My father was a Mexican national, and my mother both got my my papers together. I remember being 6 years old at my naturalization ceremony, and I remember crying because I thought it meant that if I became a US citizen, that I could no longer speak Spanish. And I remember being, 6 years old and kind of really scared about it. And my mom it was a really happy day for my mom, but I was kind of confused. I also saw her help my father gain his residency. And then later in my life, I witnessed my aunt and my cousins struggle quite a bit being undocumented in El Paso, but eventually be able to gain their status. Unfortunately, my aunt had become a victim of domestic violence, and they actually went to Las Americas for help in their case. And so that is something I grew up with, so it was very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about my background and how I get into this. As I mentioned before, I grew up in a very rural Midwest place with very little exposure to immigration and immigration issues. I went to college and then spent some time traveling, was able to go abroad and study abroad in Central America, and really start to learn more about the racial and economic disparities in the US and in other countries. Things I didn't learn in school growing up where I did. And so after college, was fortunate to have the opportunity to do a volunteer experience for a year in South Texas, in San Antonio. And I went into it just with a chance to improve my Spanish, maybe learn a little bit about issues surrounding immigration, and fell in love with it, working with refugees and people, fleeing all kinds of things in their home countries or looking for opportunities here, and kind of fell in love with the work I was doing and learning from people who are extremely resilient and strong and inspiring. And so that kind of took me on a path of wanting to study it more. Went to law school with the intention of continuing as an immigration attorney. Much like Cynthia, had the opportunity in law school to do some representation as a student, and then was fortunate to have this opportunity to work in Indiana, close to kind of my roots, and work with our immigrant community here. So that's kind of what brought me to this field.
Okay, so you all had similar but different paths. What led you guys to study immigration law? Could you guys share any challenges and successes that you've had working with the immigrant community? How, Cynthia?
Linda, you want to go ahead?
You go first.
I think definitely, like I said, I mean, some of the cases that people have been really waiting the longest, or people that are really fleeing really bad situations. I mean, those are always highs. A big high for us was when DACA was passed, because a lot of people that qualified for DACA had been waiting, years and years and trying to fix their status and just weren't able to, and that's why they created DACA. So there's a lot of highs and lows. Lows are, the system is very against immigration. I think a big part of that is due to not completely understanding how immigration works and how difficult it can be sometimes and complicated. So it is kind of it's a very divisive issue, and as of recent, it's been very uphill battle with a lot of the government attorneys and judges and things like that. So there are a lot of ups and downs, and we try to just kind of focus on the ups as much as we can. Winning asylum cases too. Whenever you win an asylum case, those are always great.
Yes, definitely the victories are great, but I think as immigration attorneys, in particular, the last few years, we've actually had to reframe what a victory looks like, because it is sometimes very difficult to win these cases. I would say the lowest point for me, a couple of really big ones, was living through family separation, sitting with mostly, for me, I mostly represented women at that time who had been separated from their children. I believe the mother that I represented who had the youngest child taken from her, the child was 5 years old, and it ranged from 5 to about age 15. I think as lawyers, we do always want to have some sort of boundaries with our, between ourselves and our clients and not become too emotionally invested. But I think I had to throw all that out the window during family separation. And I found myself just crying along with these mothers who unfortunately many times did not know where their children were, had not been able to speak for them for weeks, were not told at the time that they would be separated. Some of them were tricked into the separation. That was a very, very low moment, in my opinion, for our country. And the other one would be when people started to be, for the first time ever, forced into Mexico. So these are not Mexican asylum seekers or people that are from Mexico seeking immigration help. These were people from Central America, Cuba, as well as other countries in South America that were trying to reach our US borders and were then sent to Mexico with really no plan. So unfortunately, at the moment that the United States was sending these people to Mexico, they had their court date, but then they were just literally escorted right across over the border. If you're not from a border town, I literally could take my car right now, park it, walk across the border in a matter of about 5 to 7 minutes, depending on how fast I'm walking. So this is how these people were then taken into Mexico. And the majority of people I was interviewing, in the moments they were on Mexican soil and really didn't know where to go or what to do, were kidnapped. It was, unfortunately, we created more victims for the criminal entities in these border cities that already prey on migrant families. One of the reasons they prey on migrant families is because they know that many of these families, the majority of them, have family in the United States that are very hardworking and will pay very high extortion and kidnapping prices. We're talking about $5,000, $8,000. I've seen up to $10,000 for ransom. Those were some really low moments. The high moments was seeing the end of family separation, seeing the reunifications, and coming back every single day to do this work and having the motivation to do it, for me is the high point. And it's something I hope to do for a long time.
Yeah, and I would certainly echo both what Cynthia and Linda are expressing. Although I'm in Northern Indiana, our organization did represent some separated families as well in the Laredo area. And one case for me, definitely kind of illustrates that. I represented a mother from Angola who was separated from her 2 young kids for over 2 years, and just suffering the day-to-day trauma with her of that separation, knowing what they were going through. And in addition to everything that she had suffered in her home country as well, that led to her asylum claim, is just heartbreaking. With that, she was reunified with her family finally in February, and that was, I think, one of the highlights of my entire career, was seeing them begin to be able to heal and be together again. Another low point that I want to highlight, as far as our work here in the interior of the country, was seeing a lot of families in our community who are being targeted in higher numbers by internal enforcement as well. We hear a lot about family separation at the border, and the policy that was implemented in 2018 that I know Linda and Cynthia are very familiar with, and that we'll talk about, but also the trauma that's put on people in the interior who may be detained by immigration forces on collateral arrest, people that may not even necessarily have criminal charges, who are placed in detention, although they, maybe had never committed a crime or done anything to deserve that. So, that was kind of a low point too. We're starting to kind of see things turn around a little bit, but certainly a lot of ups and downs along the way.
Okay, my next question, Linda has already briefly touched on it. Immigrants crossing the US and Mexico border are usually perceived as Mexican. Are there other countries that immigrants are fleeing from? And are you guys aware of what the Mexican country is doing to try and help these immigrants?
So yeah, we see people from all over the world. Las Americas, like I mentioned before, we're a 34-year-old organization. We've actually helped people from 80 different countries. So yes, in our El Paso border, it's definitely a misconception that we're only getting people that are wanting to immigrate to the United States from Mexico or from Latin American countries. Actually, people are coming in from all over the world. What Mexico is doing, that's a really, really good question. Unfortunately, we do see a really big force in Mexico in the southern border, to the point where we are very concerned about the violation of human rights that Mexican officials are committing on the southern border. We have seen and heard stories, horrific videos. There are detention centers. We see truly disproportionate treatment of Black migrants in Mexico, in the United States as well, but also we're talking about how Mexico treats folks. So that is very scary. Once you get to the northern side, though, I have to say, I am seeing Mexico step up when you have the United States essentially say, we're going to send people back. I mean, I talked a little bit about the migrant protection protocols, also known as MPP, where people were then taken to Mexico with a US court date. I was talking about that. So after the pandemic, there is really no MPP now. People are being expelled from the country, so with no court date whatsoever. And that is what you see as Mexico step up in the humanitarian aid. Right now, we are in El Paso. Sorry, my daughter woke up. Expelling over 100 people a day into Ciudad Juarez. There is no shelter space. So we have a situation where Mexico is trying their hardest. And the unfortunate thing is that on this side of the border, we do have shelter space, and we have been preparing for this for months now. We've been preparing with our city, our county government. We've been preparing with fellow NGOs. And so we are ready to welcome. But unfortunately, the government continues to expel people into Ciudad Juarez. And Ciudad Juarez right now, our sister city, is not as prepared as El Paso is. And it's very unfortunate to see that, but I do see Mexico trying on the northern side to provide some sort of humanitarian aid.
Yeah, likewise, we have clients from all over. I mean, it really does tie into what's going on in the world politically, socially, economically. There were, you know, whenever there's huge earthquakes, we see an influx of migration. It's actually, for us, we don't see a lot of Mexicans anymore. It was really, when I first started practicing, like 2011, 2012, when it was really bad in Mexico, was when we were seeing a lot of Mexican migrants. Right now, Cubans, Brazilians, I don't remember which country just had an earthquake, and so we're seeing a lot of them. But yeah, it's a huge misconception that people think people only come from Mexico or just call immigrants Mexicans. We get a lot of Cubans as well too. I mean, for a while we had a map and we would put a dot on every country that we had a client from. And I remember one was like Urzikstan or something. We had to look it up. So yeah, people come from everywhere, for sure.
And I don't need to add too much to that. Similar from our perspective up here in Indiana. Those of you in Fort Wayne are familiar with probably that there's a large Burmese community there. But yeah, our client base is from all over the world, from, yes, Mexico, but Central America and African countries, Middle Eastern countries, Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti. And one thing I'll mention just with the work that we do, you know, we provide legal services to unaccompanied minors who are in Office of Refugee Resettlement custody in this area. And so I know we'll talk more about issues facing those kids, but primarily we're seeing many of those children coming from what we call the Northern Triangle countries of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala.
Okay, and then all of us joining in this call are curious and interested of what's going on. Many of us have watched the news and what's unfolding at the border, showing children being separated from their families. Could any of you guys touch on the topic of how did we really get here? And I can.
Linda, I think you are the at least between the two of us, the best to speak on family separation for sure.
Sure. So family separation, you know, there's different, I think we've had to, as practitioners, kind of learn like to categorize different types of family separation. Family separation has been happening for many years. It happens via deportation quite a bit, but we're talking, I think that for the purposes of this, we're talking about zero tolerance family separation, which happened in the Trump administration, in particular 2018, when Jeff Sessions was the Attorney General. So family separation did begin to occur. El Paso was actually the testing ground, the testing ground for family separation. Give me 1 second. Here, mommy, here, you're fine, you're fine.
Linda has 2 precious babies. Well, I guess the big one's not a baby anymore, but.
But El Paso was the testing ground. So since 2017, we've been dealing with family separation in El Paso, Texas. But in 2018, around June, the ACLU did have a successful case ending family separation. So we're not seeing that zero tolerance family separation the way we were in 2018, where people were separated from their young children and from their minor children at the border and were then detained without their children and their children taken into the ORR system. That we're not seeing. I mean, you might see it in a very, very limited situations that we still don't agree with. But we're not seeing it widely. There are still people separated. There's still families that are separated from their, we have allergies here on the border, guys. We still have families separated from those 2017, 2018 separations. We in particular represent 4 mothers who continue to be separated. They were deported without their children. Their children are still in the United States without their mothers, which is very, very difficult, but we're not seeing that family separation. The family separation we see today is, it's really still traumatic. Grandmothers separated from their young grandchildren that they're traveling to the United States with. We're seeing that separation, or, you know, sometimes it's aunts or cousins or older siblings with their younger children. We see that family separation. We're actually working with the Biden administration. So right now what's happening is that they're operating on that the person is not suitable, that they're automatically saying that the person is not suitable to care for the child. And so we would like that to start to shift, especially, you know, at least that's starting with grandmas and siblings. That is highly traumatic when they're separated at the border, and then the child is then categorized as an unaccompanied child. That is the type of family separation we continue to see on the border.
Yeah, the only thing I can maybe add to that too is things that we're seeing, you know, as Linda mentioned, because people are still being turned away at the border in such high numbers. You know, one important thing to keep in mind with the current context is that the vast majority of people who are attempting to enter are still single adults and are being turned away, but also many family units are trying to enter. And the policy is still that for public health reasons, family units are being turned away in many circumstances. And so, you know, sometimes another form of kind of family separation is parents having to make the excruciating decision that their children are not safe being with them in Mexico. And because they're unaccompanied, if they enter the country by themselves, the children by law must be let into the United States. And so we do see families having to make that excruciating decision because our government is currently not allowing these families to enter together as units. So while, yes, our government is not separating families here on this side in the way that was happening in 2018, you know, we are still seeing that trauma being inflicted on some families by making that decision.
Yeah,
And just to add to that really quickly, we actually just in the past 2 days, I personally interviewed 17 family units that were expelled by the Biden administration into Ciudad Juarez. Really, really horrific stories of the expulsions. Something that I think, no matter where you fall on this, I don't think people should be lied to, and they're actually being lied to before they're expelled. And then taunted later. They're being told, don't worry, you're going to go to a shelter in California, everything's going to be okay. And then they're flown from Reynosa to El Paso or to Tijuana, and then they're escorted to the Mexican side of the border. Sometimes when people arrive in the Mexican side of the border, they don't even know they're in Mexico, and they feel like they were completely deceived and lied to. And some have had complete panic attacks and thrown themselves to the ground because they cannot believe what's happening, and they're in need of immediate psychological care. There's a lot of trauma that these families are enduring right now that just from a purely humane perspective, it's really hard to see what's happening right now.
Yeah, we were seeing it more in the context of, I was seeing the adults that were detained that had been separated. So normally what would happen is if we would go to do a consultation with a detainee, it would come up. There was a period in 2018 where we were basically asking all our clients, who did you enter with? And do you know where, if they entered with children, do you know where they are? And a lot of the time they didn't. They knew, they had talked to their family members, and they knew that their family members had been in contact with somebody who was taking care of the children, and they were trying to release the children to the family, but there were a lot of hoops the family had to jump through, to make sure that they were the family member and things like that. But it was happening a lot where they just didn't even know where their children were. And so they were asking us, and it was even difficult for us as immigration practitioners to kind of track down where the child was. We reached out to organizations like Las Americas a lot when we had somebody who couldn't find a child, but it was happening a lot more in like 2018.
Okay, and touching on the fact that the children are able to enter the United States without their parents, because like Peter said, children are allowed to come in. And Linda also stated that El Paso, the city of El Paso, is very prepared to with shelter to receive the children. What are the conditions in the detention centers that the children are staying right now, and even the conditions in adult detention centers?
I can kind of start off, I guess. And of course, Cynthia and Linda chime in. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to be in any of the facilities that have been open, but just to step back a minute to explain a little bit about the context of the legal standards for unaccompanied children and their care while they're in the US. By law, once a child enters unaccompanied and they're determined to be an unaccompanied minor, so under 18, not traveling with a parent or guardian, by law, they can only be kept in CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, custody for up to 72 hours because, it's been determined that that's not a safe and appropriate environment for a child. And so that they must be transferred to the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement within 72 hours. And so with the influx of so many kids in the last couple of months, and by the way, this is not the first time this has happened. There's been influxes of children coming across the border at various points for a couple of decades. And, we can talk a little bit more about the root causes of that at some point. But, when they're entering in such high numbers and there's not sufficient space for them in the existing or our facilities, what's happening now is that the government is opening kind of these emergency intake centers in convention centers or military bases, basically as a form of triage sites where children can be kept in the care of Office of Refugee Resettlement so that they're not in CBP custody. And pictures have been coming out recently about some of the conditions in those places, people being kept in close quarters. But I think that legitimately there's being progress made in making sure that these kids can be reunified with family members within the United States as quickly as possible. And that while they're in that setting, that they're receiving adequate education, healthcare, you know, basic necessities, obviously, for the limited time that they need to be in those settings. So, Cynthia, I don't know if you or Linda have anything to add from what you're seeing there in El Paso.
Linda, do you want to go first? I think she might be with her baby. So I'll speak first to the adult detention centers. Every facility is a little different. I mostly see clients. So we had basically three detention centers that we would go to. Sierra Blanca was about an hour away. It's no longer an ICE facility, so we don't go out there anymore. In Otero, New Mexico, it's in Chaparral, New Mexico, is about 20, 30 minutes from El Paso, is one of the detention centers. And then of course we have a detention center here in El Paso. I've heard from a couple clients that things like they give them used underwear to use at Otero. I've heard that from a couple clients. Also in Otero, like cameras in the showers and things like that. I don't know if that's true. I've only heard that. I heard that from one client. Some people prefer El Paso because they prefer the food, but we've had a lot of issues really right now with COVID because El Paso has one of the lowest percentage of approval ratings for asylum cases. They're less than 5% approval rating our judges give on asylum cases. So what we really try to focus on is getting people out on bond so they don't have to be detained while they're presenting their case, which can be months. And they weren't even taking into consideration really a lot. We were finding a lot of the judges weren't even taking into consideration the fact that they were being even more exposed to COVID by being in these facilities. So I know Otero was a hot spot for a while and they weren't releasing numbers. El Paso as well, they weren't really releasing numbers on how many COVID cases they had, but people were being uber exposed by being in these facilities. But generally the adults, I mean, of course, it's like being in prison. It's a light prison, but they are behind bars. They have to eat at certain times, get up at certain times and things like that. I know with the children, I think Linda can speak to the children a lot more. I do know that they do require you sign NDAs and things like that so that you don't disclose the conditions of the children's centers. I'm not sure, so I'm not sure how much Linda can talk about it. I can say that I know that, and I only speak to this because I know that a lot of people are concerned with, someone sent a comment on the chat that, these children, are they eating and are they being treated well and things like that. As far as what I've seen, yes, they're being treated well, they're eating. It may not be the food they like. It may not, it's not the best conditions. They are detained. They don't know where their parents are, but they are being fed. They are being cared for. But like I said, Linda can probably speak to that more than me.
Hi. So actually the organization that has the contract to go into the centers is DMRS, and for those reasons, they actually wouldn't even be allowed to participate in this type of a conversation. There are a lot of limits as to what they can say and well, mostly say and reveal. I think we talk about the treatment of children. When children are with their families, I'm seeing some treatment right now that is very alarming, and I have brought it up to our Congresswoman as well as the actual Border Patrol chief. When children are being returned with their families, something that I find very disheartening is their medication is being taken away. I met a family whose child is epileptic, and his medication was thrown away. Unfortunately, we hear these kinds of stories all the time. For some reason, Border Patrol is throwing away the children's shoes before they're returned with their families. I don't quite understand why that is. We've also heard a lot of children being very, very hungry when they're being held with their parents. And I bring that up because there has been a lot of progress on how unaccompanied children are being treated. And we've seen some of these images of actually the Congress people going into these facilities, and there was like bins of brand new shoes, like really nice child-friendly shoes, all different colors and sizes. Hold on, Mama. And so that was good, but I see this disproportional treatment of how they're treating children that they're going to expel. but they still, I think anybody deserves, at least, especially children, some humanity. So having children then being returned completely barefoot, we've also heard extremely soiled diapers. They're returned in extreme. So, I mean, somebody was like, well, any diaper could be extremely soiled. I'm a mom, you know, when when the diaper hasn't been changed in a long, long time, and that's what's happening. So I did bring that up, but the good thing is we are seeing some progress on how the unaccompanied children are being treated. And I think that there's more access to the facilities now. There's stakeholder tours to the facilities. I was on a stakeholder tour under the Obama administration for a children's facility that opened on a military base, which we're repeating, and we're doing that now. And I mean, like, very honestly, it wasn't perfect. It's not where I would like my children to be, especially without me, right? But it was humane. There was food being cooked in the kitchen that smelled like something that I would want to eat. I can't say the same for when I've toured the adult detention centers, and we've been into the kitchens and it has horrific smells and you don't know what in the world they're eating. So we're seeing some progress in how unaccompanied children are being treated. I think that that is something that a few folks could agree with me on.
Yeah, and I have, like Linda said, for a while, well, it still is, DMRS is Diocesan Migrant and Refugee Services that provides the legal services to the children. And I think it can kind of ease people's mind. They are being fed. They are being treated decently. But I mean, a lot of the facilities were tents. Like in 2018, it was tents and things like that. So the kids were really hot, but they were trying to take care of them. I mean, the medical attention that they're getting obviously isn't the same as being with their parents, but they were being fed and things like that and looked after. It is very difficult to get in to see them. A lot of people wanted, I mean, I was getting reached out to by everybody. And like I said, I really don't even represent children, but people wanting to send diapers, people wanting to send books. It's very difficult to get into the facilities. DMRS has a contract. They've done all the background checks. They've signed all the non-disclosure agreements and things like that. And people that work in the facilities have to pass background checks and things like that. So they don't accept donations really because they don't know where they're coming from, and they can't let people into the facilities. So yeah, that does kind of become an issue when people do want to donate or things like that.
Yeah, and the other piece of that just to mention is the emergency facilities now that we've talked a little bit about, and more, I guess, established licensed ORR facilities where kids, unaccompanied minors, are placed in the regular course. Those are all always meant to be temporary. Like, the goal is always reunification with family members within the United States. So, kids ideally are not there for more than a matter of days before being reunified with family.
Yeah, and I think that that's so important. Like, that's such a big push. We do, I mean, even if the facilities are, they're getting better, this is not where we want children to be for more than, like Peter said, a couple of days. And we're really pushing for these, the background checks on the family. I think that we need to place our resources on getting these done quicker. It's kind of hard to believe that they can do these rapid background tests to increase their staff, the amount of staff, and they're able to somehow complete background checks with their staff really quickly, but not on the families that they're supposed to reunify with. So I think that there's definitely solutions that we have to be looking at. And, we hope we see more positive changes, and children, the main thing is to reunite them with a family member, with a sponsor, as soon as possible.
Yeah, and just to add to that, for what Linda was saying, they do, when they release the children, they do the background checks that she's talking about is on the family members that they get released to. So these children aren't just getting released to random people, which was kind of a misconception that was out there, was that, like, there was a lot of human trafficking and things like that going on. I mean, of course, that stuff does happen, but not so much, not the children that they're releasing them to.
And there was just a question in the chat about that's relevant to this. I don't know if you all want us to respond to those now, or if we should save questions to the end.
Yes, we can go ahead and address the question in the chat.
So yeah, I see one that came through that, what about children who cannot be reunified with family members in the US? So the way that works, as Cynthia and Linda have talked about, is that there are background checks conducted before a child is released, for their safety. Obviously, we don't want to just release kids to anyone without verification of who they are and that kind of thing. But it doesn't have to just be parents. So many of the kids that we see in our service area and elsewhere do have some form of family. Maybe it's not a parent, but an aunt or uncle or cousin who's equipped to care for them. And so often that's a possibility to be released to other extended family members or trusted sponsors. For those few kids that don't have family members in the US and nowhere to reunify, they are able to remain in Office of Refugee Resettlement custody during the duration of their immigration cases. There are various levels of that, long-term foster care programs for those children who are eligible for relief in the US, where they are able to be well cared for and and protected while they're going through their immigration case.
And just to, Susanna, also I'll jump in, just so that everyone kind of understands, because I didn't even understand this when what was happening in 2018. So what was happening is that they were, even though a child was not necessarily an unaccompanied minor, they were categorizing them as unaccompanied minors so that they could place them in the program. So that was one of the biggest issues really that we were seeing in 2018. And that's why there were such high numbers, because these children weren't necessarily entering unaccompanied, but they were recategorizing them in order to effectuate these family separations.
Yeah, and that thanks for pointing that out, Cynthia. That's an important distinction. And what we've seen with a lot of those kids who were directly separated from parents in 2018 is that many of them would be ultimately reunified with maybe another family member that they had in this country. And many of their parents were actually then deported back to their country of origin. And so, there's the ACLU case that Linda mentioned earlier is ongoing. And there's been a lot of efforts to try to reunify those families still, to give the opportunity for those parents who were deported from their children and separated from their children to maybe give them the opportunity to return and apply for asylum. So that's kind of where we're at with that. There's still a lot of kids that were separated and not reunited.
Okay, and then we have another comment in the chat that says, Carrie has a friend who has applied to foster migrant children. And I know Peter mentioned that there's extensive background checks for when the children do get released to a family member, and make sure that they're being released to someone where they will be safe with and not just a complete stranger, like Cynthia said. Are you guys aware of the process? Or the process, application process that families interested in fostering children need to take?
I would like to just mention before delving into that, and Peter may have more information on that, but I think it's really important for us to know, as we're in the United States, we're definitely coming from a place of more privilege than the parents of these children, but truly the majority of these children have a place to go. And they have a place to go where the parents who have made this excruciatingly difficult decision that no one of us would ever have to want to make, right? You only place your child in the water if the land is too dangerous for them. And this is what's happening. And so these children come already, many of them are reuniting with their grandmothers, sometimes with the parents themselves who may have come to the country first. Other times it is, cousins or more distant relatives, but it's somebody that the parent knows that it is obviously from the same family, blood, right? The same country, the same culture, So I just think it is important to know that a lot of these children that are reaching our border are not in need of, and not to say I think that anyone who wants to do fostering is incredibly commendable. I actually, even though I have 2 kids, I also find myself, wanting to do something like that. But in terms of these unaccompanied children, there are the majority of them are meeting with a relative, but there are, of course, there are some that don't. And like in any foster's situation are going to slip through the cracks and need families that are able to welcome them.
Yeah, absolutely, Linda. That's important. I agree totally with everything that you just said. I can explain a little bit about the way that works in some ways. So children that are placed in ORR custody. So every child that enters unaccompanied is placed in ORR custody. And during the time that their families are being vetted and they're doing the background checks and things like that, there are various levels of facilities where children are held during that time, from dormitory style shelters to what are called temporary foster care programs. So for instance, a lot of very young children, it's a more appropriate setting for them to be placed with families, even just temporarily while their families are being located. And so, for instance, in Indiana, one of the shelters we work with is a temporary foster care shelter. So we're working with the kids during the time that they're there. And even though they're with foster families, it's never permanent or even long-term. The goal is always to have them reunified with family members. And as Linda said, the vast majority of kids do have someone here that they can reunify with. And there are specific programs for the few kids that don't, such as long-term foster care or other programs.
And additionally, there is a movement of, getting children out of detention and more focused on a foster care placement immediately. So that we're not there yet. We're looking at these temporary emergency facilities, but there are some people who believe that the foster care system should be expanded to include migrant children from the onset. So that's, again, we're not quite there yet. And I think I used to work in the child welfare system when I was a baby attorney. And it's hard to know if that's even knowing what the states also go through with their foster systems, and just how overextended a lot of these situations are state-wise. It's difficult to know if this is going to be the best thing for migrant children as well. I think it's all still in talks and in the works.
And on the topic of reunification, sorry, we have a question in the chat that says, approximately how long does it take to get children into to their U.S. family members?
Yeah, so that varies quite a bit. I'm not quite sure of the current average time, but it varies a lot. A lot of kids, it can be just a few days. If there's a parent, especially who's easily identifiable and they're able to do everything quickly. It can be as little as a few days, 3 to 5 days. Many of the kids who are going through these emergency shelters, are able to be reunified directly from there within a few days. Hopefully that continues to be the case. For some kids, it can take a little bit longer. Up to a few weeks or a couple months, but it really depends on the case and what level or what type of family member they have that they'll be reunifying with.
Yeah, my understanding is here on our border, in the facilities that are here, a more realistic number. So aspirationally, for many years, kind of during the Obama administration and the beginning of the Trump administration, it was about 2 to 3 weeks. And then unfortunately that really shot up with family separation because they were categorizing more children as unaccompanied minors. That waiting time also really went up. I mean, we were, for the first time, a lot of these kids were starting to go into the El Paso court repeatedly because they had been so long in the facility that some of y'all may have seen in the media, which was Tornillo, which was a tent city, like Cynthia was talking about. So it's varied, but there was a time that it was 2 to 3 weeks, and that was deemed somewhat acceptable, especially when the kids were a little bit older, from about 12 to 17. But as the years have gone on, we've actually seen, we're starting to see more and more younger children come in. And so the few days is really the ideal situation that we're striving towards.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is that you just have to remember that they're being processed. So whether, it's CBP first, and for example, if it's CBP that encounters them first, and then they have to get processed by ICE. And so once that's done, and then they have to reach out to the family, and then they have to do the background checks. So it can take some time. And that's what Linda was talking about earlier with the background checks when they're taking longer, it's longer time that the children are separated. But they are in removal proceedings. So they do have to get processed. Even if they're released, they're still going to have court hearings. So that's another misconception too with these type of cases, is that if somebody gets released, whether it's under bond, whether it's a child, they still are in removal proceedings. They're still going to have to go to court. They still have to present their case, and a judge is going to decide whether they stay or not. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're, oh, well, now they're here in the US and they're legal, and that's not how it works. It's still a process.
Okay, speaking on the process, there was a news report back in 2018 that had a very controversial number, where it said that 1,500 children were lost in a sense. Is there any truth to that statement? And then what is the country doing to track the amount of unaccompanied children entering the United States?
I'm happy to take that unless one of the other, Linda or Cynthia, want to talk about it. So I don't know the exact number. There were probably, that's probably somewhat accurate as far as the number of, it was thousands of kids who were separated from their parents in 2018. As far as, it's important to distinguish what they mean by lost. It's not that the children were just released into the country, lost, no one knew where they were. The children would have been in OR custody, but by lost, I think they mean separated from their parents, and the government had no idea where these kids' parents were, which is extremely troubling and is part of the problem with what was happening in 2018, that, family separation was happening as the stated purpose of deterrence by the prior administration, that they were doing this to deter people from entering. And they really never had any plan to reunify them. It's clear, because there was such poor tracking of where these kids and their parents were. So yeah, as far as loss, I think that's probably true that many kids were separated. But as Linda and I talked about a little bit, they are starting to identify more and more where those parents are. Many of them have been deported to their home countries, so there's an ongoing process of trying to hopefully have many of those families have the opportunity to seek asylum and be allowed back into the country.
And I think that headline that Susana was talking about, it definitely caught a lot of people's attention, and that's a good thing, because in immigration we want people to care about immigration. But the thing about that is that a lot of folks, once a child is released to their family member, to the sponsor family, they don't have a lot of trust in the government. They don't know what happens next in their case. And so this tracking of children after they are released, they still have removal proceedings, and they must go to court. And, unfortunately they're not granted access to attorneys either, which is very intimidating for them and their families. But so some people, I think it boiled down to, and Peter and Cynthia could correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I recall, it boiled down to families really not wanting to answer the phone because they were very distrusting of the government. And so the missing children was really just a losing track of children who had been released to family members who had already been vetted.
Yeah, that's kind of been my sense too, is it's been more, they haven't shown up for court or things like that, but you do have to also keep in mind that if somebody doesn't appear for their hearing, that they can get basically a deportation, a removal order, even if they don't show up. So, so that will affect them, you know, from ever gaining legal status if they do fail to appear for any of their hearings.
Yeah, and on that note, I think that's an important thing to point out too, is that unlike in like our criminal legal system, people don't have a right to appointed counsel in immigration proceedings. And so that's something that as advocates, we're constantly pushing for everybody, but at the very least for children. And so part of what our organization does, and many others across the country, is receiving funding to offer legal services to kids while they're in ORR custody. And then to a certain extent, also when they're released to family members, to be able to connect them with attorneys to help them through the system. Part of the reason that's important is exactly what Cynthia just said, is people are substantially more likely to appear at their proceedings if they're represented. There was just a report released by the American Immigration Council that kind of goes against a prominent narrative that people don't show up for their proceedings, which is not true. This report found that overall, as many as 83% of people across the board show up to their immigration proceedings, but it goes up to like 96, high 90% for people that are represented. So yeah, there is this kind of sense of distrust of the government, totally, and that may have been a contributing factor to many of these families not being able to be reconnected. But also, pretty amazingly, like many of these people are eligible for relief and want to comply with the requirements. And so they do in large numbers show up to their proceedings as well.
Yeah, and there, I see in the comments, I'm not sure, I think his name is William, is it? Washburn, about border security and the importance of border security and having those resources to handle the people coming through. Border security is super important, of course. I think that we as immigration practitioners, because we see the state that our clients are in, maybe understand a little bit better that I have always said, as long as there's inequality on one side, as long as there's a wall separating countries of inequality, people are going to figure out ways to scale those walls. I mean, when you're starving, when you're, you know, your children, if you stay where you're at, your children are going to die. People are going to figure out the way to get their child fed. I mean, it's just human nature. So I think the Biden administration has done a much better job at understanding that we need to address the issues of some of the stuff that's going on in these other countries in order to kind of keep these numbers down of people that are just immigrating. Also re-implementing, they used to be able to apply for asylum from their home country, which I believe was done away with under the Trump administration. But it is a big issue, not, you know, even though it's funding and sometimes people disagree with helping other countries, but it is important, especially when it's issues that we've created in those countries with our political, you know, stances that we've had. We've created a lot of problems in El Salvador and Guatemala and things like that. But entire generations of young men are getting wiped out in El Salvador and Guatemala by the gangs, and so. Yeah, as long as those issues, as long as they're starving and dying, I mean, these borders are they're going to figure out ways to get in. And so border security is important, but there's a lot more that has to go on with border security, in my opinion, not just border security, but there has to be comprehensive reform. There has to be ways for people to actually get legal status, which is very difficult right now, unless you have an immediate family member. And like I said, asylum cases in El Paso, less than a 5% approval rating on asylum cases. So the law just doesn't comport with the realities of the situation. So border security is just one component, in my opinion, but there has to be a lot of other pieces that are looked at along with that.
Yeah, we can tell you also, living on the border, we have an incredibly militarized border. I mean, in our home at any given moment, you're going to hear helicopters these are Border Patrol, these are DHS helicopters. Our border is extremely safe. El Paso is one of the safest cities in the entire country, and we can really attest to the fact that this is an incredibly safe border city. And if we continue to overly emphasize and focus on border security, we continue to lose our humanity along the way. And we stop looking at, you know, we need to be able to see the newly arriving families who are in need of our help away from this security lens. They're not national security threats. You know, people are processed. We have the technology to process them quickly. You know, right now, I think something interesting happening that could really point to the future of how we treat migrants is Biden did put an end to MPP. MPP was the Migrant Protection Protocols, and now people are being let into the country. And what is done is they're actually being processed outside of the country with UN partners. This is UNHCR, IOM. These are, again, partners of the UN. And then the technology that CBP has, people are just able to walk right across the border. I'm so sorry. And be, you know, and they're completely, I'm trying to entertain her with all the things that are on my dining room table. But I just really think that the partnerships with the UN partners allow us to look at things in a more humane way. And that's what I'm trying to say, that I think that we need to be, I think security is there. Look at the resources, look at the budget of Border Patrol. When you look at the number of Border Patrol agents we have now, even when you compare it and they say numbers are higher of families crossing, we still look at the number of Border Patrol agents and the budget of Border Patrol, and it's bigger than it ever has been before. So I definitely think we've gotten the security part right. To the point where we are not looking at a way to reimagine how we welcome. We want to be able to welcome people who seek the protection in this country with more dignity than we're doing so now. And I think taking away from the security scope is really important for us to be able to do that. And I don't think it'll make us any less safer. I think that when we have law enforcement focused on changing diapers or not changing diapers instead of actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's when we become less safe. We need to focus on this differently.
Yeah, and if I could just piggyback on a couple of those points that both Cynthia and Linda mentioned about both funding and the issues that are causing people to flee. You know, there's so many things going on there, that there's, you know, the gang violence and corruption in some of the countries where people are forced to leave. But on top of that, you know, the pandemic has decimated many of these countries, and as it has the whole world, but especially many of these poor countries that are run by governments that are plagued by corruption. And on top of that, 2 hurricanes hit Central America last year that forced the displacement of some 8 million people. And so there's all of these different reasons that people are fleeing. There's some encouraging signs that the Biden administration has dedicated funds to those countries for aid, also trying to establish programs to vet people's asylum claims from those countries to try to make that a more orderly process. We'll see what comes out of that. But also importantly, reinstituting a program that started under the Obama administration, was canceled under Trump, and that's trying to be restarted, is a program to allow minors in those Central American countries to reunify with family members in the US who do have status, and trying to facilitate that process more easily. So there are several other things that we need to be talking about, as Linda and Cynthia both said, in addition to border security, and trying to address a lot of those push factors that cause people to flee and, you know, risk their lives to try to come to the United States or other countries.
Yeah, and just to add to, I mean, I feel like the political, like I said, immigration is so divisive, but I feel like the political rhetoric has been so much, you're either this or you're either that. I mean, I don't think, even as an immigration practitioner, like, I'm not saying we open all the borders and we let everybody in. That's not what anybody's saying. That's not what we're trying to do. What we want is just a system that works. I mean, if you're going to come and ask for asylum, then you should be heard, and you should be heard rationally, and, you know, by an unbiased person who's going to decide, you know, are you telling the truth? Is it a good reason to come here? Like, we pass background checks, things like that. And that's just simply not what's going on. So We're not saying open the gates, let everybody in. That's not what people on the left or immigration practitioners or anybody is saying. I mean, we all care about these issues. It's important, but we do just want a system that works.
Yeah, and on that point, there, someone had mentioned in the chat that we hear, especially in this part of the country in Indiana, those messages of, the floodgates being opened and things like that. It is important to distinguish that in many ways, this is a manufactured crisis. That yes, there are a lot of unaccompanied minors, especially, that are entering for legitimate reasons that we've discussed. But largely, it's also being used as part of the narrative to distract from some of the things that could be done for people that have already been living in the United States for many years, such as Dreamers. The Dream and Promise Act was passed by the House to protect those children in particular who have been in the U.S. For years, were brought here by their parents. And that's been largely non-controversial for years, but now many lawmakers are trying to use this border crisis, trying to manufacture it to be something that it's not, to also distract from some of those things we can do to protect our communities here within the United States as well. Those, as I mentioned, Dreamers and others who have contributed to our communities and our economy for years.
Yeah, and Washburn commented, it's a strawman argument. No one claimed you wanted to remove the border entirely. No, I'm not saying that that's what you're saying. I'm saying that that's a lot of the rhetoric out there was that, oh, if you're either want extreme security or you don't want security, and then there's a middle ground, I think, somewhere that needs to be found. Susanna, there was a question also on the economics of immigration. I don't know if you want us to address that.
Yes, I'm actually catching up on my chat box here. You could give me just a moment. So there's a question in the chat that says one of the biggest reasons people are against immigrations is they say that immigrants are a drain to our economy. Do you guys have any statistics or numbers to indicate how much immigrants add to our economy?
I'll go. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Oh, okay. So every study that's ever been out indicates that immigrants add to the community, particularly economically. So first of all, you have to understand that you can't get most benefits. You have to have a social security number. You can't get benefits without having a social security number. Most of our clients, at least, if you're here illegally, you don't have a social security number. Sometimes people have an ITIN, but you don't qualify for benefits. So that's a huge misconception that people just get government benefits and don't provide. If anything, what we see more is that people will actively get like ITINs so that they can file taxes, so that they can pay into the system, which they can then not get back. So if anything, and this is what most studies show, is that immigrants put more into the system than they take out of it. And that's been my experience with my clients. They, even for a lot of benefits, like to apply for residency and things like that, you do have to show good moral character. You have to show that you don't owe any taxes and things like that. So most of our clients, at least in my experience, have paid into the system, have never gotten anything back. If you do want to petition for somebody, you do have to show that they're not going to be dependent on the government for anything. So you have to show that you earn a certain amount and things like that, that are also mechanisms that are already in place to make sure that that isn't something that happens.
Yeah, and I don't have any specific studies to cite right at the moment, but the American Immigration Council is one good resource. They're a nonpartisan group that puts out a lot of reports on this type of thing. As Cynthia said, immigrants pay, even undocumented immigrants pay billions and billions of dollars between sales tax, property tax, and income tax every year without being eligible to withdraw from Social Security or be eligible for other benefits. So yeah, I agree with what Cynthia said, that it's billions of dollars of net positive economically from even undocumented immigrants.
Now, I know that the Department of Homeland Security for a while would put out statistics regarding to DACA and how DACA recipients are contributing to the economy. Does the Department of Homeland Security do anything regarding like the totality of all immigrants, where our attendees could go on to maybe official government websites and find any statistics?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I don't think the Department of Homeland Security does those kinds of studies internally. At least not that I'm aware of. Linda or Cynthia can correct that. But as you mentioned, there's plenty of resources out there of other groups of independent groups that do those kinds of things. And specifically mentioning DACA, just especially in the context of the pandemic, an astounding amount of DACA recipients work in healthcare or other essential industries. So there's plenty of information out there. Unfortunately, I don't think that the DHS is going to have a lot of information directly about that, the economic impact.
Yeah, not to self-promote, but I have a podcast and it's called Dream Podcast. And so what we did, we haven't done an episode in about a year, but we go back and we explain a lot of the things with obtaining your residency, applying for asylum. In the comments, someone said something about, educate yourself. You've got to look at different resources. Like Peter said, I don't think there's anything directly from the government, but you have to look at both sides of every issue, not just immigration, but educate yourself on things like this. If you understand a little bit what you have to go through in order to get your residency or in order to be here legally, I think you'll understand a little more the economics and some of the other issues that come into play. DACA. So the reason that DACA was created, for people who don't know, most of these people had no other way to get legal status. So they were living here completely illegally. So what DACA does is it only gives them work authorization. With work authorization comes with Social Security, driver's license, you can open a bank account, things like that. So it's not a permanent fix. That's why we kind of want reform and call for some sort of fix with DACA. And once they have DACA with the Social Security, then they're able to file taxes and work legally. So that's honestly the only thing that DACA really does. A big benefit is the ability to work, pay taxes and things like that. So people that are applying for DACA are doing this for that purpose so that they can do these things legally. So it just makes sense to, if they're already here, at least have them pay taxes and have them work legally versus working under their table or anything like that. So once you kind of understand the background on some of the ways to fix status or be here legally, you can kind of understand some of the economics and things like that as well.
Okay, everyone. So we are nearing the 1:30 mark. At this time, I would like to take a time to do the drawing for all attendees that were entered into the drawing. I just had a little brain fart. Sorry, everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Susanna. And thank you to all of our panelists and everybody for being here. Before we close out and before we say goodbye to everybody, I do want to take a second and share my screen. I have our drawing wheel here. So as you guys logged into the presentation here, you entered in your name and your email information. I've been tracking who's been here, who's been participating, all that kind of stuff. Those of you still here who are eligible for the drawing, I've entered you all in on the drawing wheel, and we are doing a drawing for a $50 gift card to Cheddar's, which is part of the Darden restaurant. So we're gonna go ahead and spin the wheel here. If everybody can see my screen, give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, here we go. Here's the winner. All right. Congratulations to Ellen. So Ellen, you are our $50 gift card winner to Cheddar's. That information will be emailed to you. So I did collect your email address when you logged into the presentation here, so I'll be able to email that to you. Everybody else who is here today, as well as anybody who is watching this on a recording, is also going to be entered into a second drawing for two $25 Walmart gift cards. And we will do that drawing next Wednesday on the 14th. So if you're here and you're watching the recording of this, make sure you stay after the presentation to find out how you log your participation if you're watching this on a video, and you'll also be entered into that drawing that we'll be doing on the 14th. So I'm going to turn it back over to Susanna. Thank you very much for everybody for being here, and we look forward to having you join us for our next events.
Before we close out though, we do have one last question. We have a few minutes, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I'd like Susanna to go ahead and ask the last question because the work that our panelists do is super important. And so Susanna, why don't you go ahead and go from there.
Okay, so our last question for our panel guests is, the type of work you all do is extremely taxing. What are the steps you take to separate your line of work from affecting your personal life? And what is like your self-care regimen?
I think we might have lost the other panelists.
Oh,
I'm
that's
still here.
okay.
I think Linda did drop.
Yeah. Oh, there's Peter. You want to go first, Peter?
Sure, I can. Yeah, that's an important question. I mean, in this field, as with many fields, and especially during the pandemic, that's an increasingly important thing to do, is to make sure you're taking time to recharge and make sure you're staying healthy physically and mentally. So, you know, for me, I think it's important to have like things that you do for self-care, hobbies, things that you can just get your mind away from the work. You know, we hear some horrible stories on a daily basis. And so we're always encouraging all of our employees to do things like that. For me personally, especially now that it's spring, I like to get outside and work in the garden and, you know, exercise as much as possible. All of those things are important to maintaining that balance, because burnout is a real thing, in hearing really, really hard stories on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think when you're an attorney, I don't know if there's any students in here that are thinking of going into the legal field, but we sometimes we're like the therapist and the attorney, especially if you go into fields like immigration or family law. So yeah, you have to make sure and take a lot of mental health breaks, recognize when you need breaks or you need to step away. I try to travel a lot. It's been hard with COVID, but but getting away. And then also really, like I said earlier, just focusing on the wins. I mean, when we get somebody their residency card and they've been waiting for it forever, or we're able to get someone's DACA for the first time, you know, just really focusing on the wins and the things that we are able to do for people, even just representing them in asylum cases and getting them their work authorization. I mean, those things are huge for people. So we try to focus on that and the positivity as much as possible. Change it whenever there's changes in legislation that help. We try to get that information out there. So yeah, I encourage all of you, especially COVID's been really hard for people. So take those mental breaks that you need to take. Don't feel guilty. I think mothers especially sometimes feel guilty, but take those breaks.
And thank you all so much. At this time, I want to thank our panel, Peter, Cynthia, and Linda, for joining us and really providing a safe place for us to discuss this topic and keeping everything very informational. I myself learned so much that I wasn't aware of, and I hope everyone else did too. Joann, do you want to have any last thoughts?
No, I just want to echo a big thank you to everyone. Panelists, we appreciate the information. We appreciate your time. We know how valuable it is. And so we thank you for that. And I also want to just, if everybody will give Susanna, our first time moderator and student, a round of applause. I think she did a wonderful job, and I'm so proud of the work she's done here today. And so again, to all of you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We will close the call, and I will stick around to the last of you leave. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, it's great to see your faces.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.